Professor Previtera, and now questions. So, please. Yes.
Yes. You mentioned. Oh, sure. Yeah. You mentioned the process of deindustrialization in Croatia. I was wondering what the government's plan is for future industrial or economic development. What strong points is Croatia seeking to emphasize in its future development? Where does it see itself economically in the European Union? And, in general, what is its strategy for the future, given that it has this chronic sort of trade deficit, for years and years, too many imports, not enough exports, and so on? I just wanted to comment.
First, we have to look upon what are the causes of deindustrialization. One of the causes were, of course, the aftermath of the war. During the war, one part of the industrial capacities were destroyed. Second, one part of the industrial capacities were ransacked not by the enemies, but by the domestic forces, so-called. And this is during the period of privatization. The so-called process of privatization started in 1993, and unfortunately it meant practically selling or giving away the industrial capacities and the factories to a new class, newcomers, who were practically clients or cronies of the leading political party. So this new class of entrepreneurs were not entrepreneurs at all. They were politically patronized clients of the ruling party. And their first impulse was not to develop the industry they got hold on, but to transform it into a value, into an asset, into real estate. To close the factory, not to bother with the workers, with the production, with the capital, with the market, with selling, but to transform it into solid real estate, and then to sell it or to speculate it for the civil engineering, civil building, getting loans from banks on the basis of property, and therefore a lot of factories were transformed either in real estate or in new housing capacities that were put on the market and never bought because the credit capacity of the population was not enough, or transformed in commercial centers that are now closed because there are no customers. Therefore, a lot of our industry was practically destroyed. The worst thing is, as Professor Bešker said, with our shipyards. Unfortunately, our shipyards were doing very well, but of course there are some objective problems with the crisis of the shipbuilding industry in the whole world, especially in the developed countries in Europe. And secondly, there was also the ransacking of the shipyards, because during the period of the Europeanized Croatian Democratic Union, during the 2000 years, during this corruption for which the former prime minister was sentenced to that 10 years, a system of racketeering was established. The leading party imposed a kind of racket on all the socially controlled or state-controlled companies. They had to give a certain amount of money in cash to the political party in power. This was pure racketeering.
Never more than 15%.
And this, unfortunately, with the politically made decisions, who will be the management of this or that shipyard, brought the shipyards to a catastrophe. Only one shipyard out of 6 shipyards in Croatia maintained its stability or health, and it was one in Pola, in the peninsula of Istria, because of the strong Istrian democratic diet that didn't permit that the government and the state meddles in the affair of choosing the managers in the shipbuilding industry. And they maintained that the managers in the shipbuilding industry were really competent. And since these shipyards were state-owned, of course the state had a predominant role in imposing the management, the board of management. And this was also made and done in a clientelistic way, in a chronic way, chronism, in a way of chronism. Now the problem is, what is the perspective? The perspective of Croatia is to build a healthy industry based on the small and medium enterprises. It's obvious that all the giants from the socialist time cannot survive in such a diversified economies of the West. Therefore, small and medium enterprises should be one possible solution, taking into account the local advantages, a certain level of qualified manpower, a certain level of less salaries, or smaller salaries than the other parts of Europe, and then of course taking into account a massive help from the state. The state, for instance, passed last year a law on incentives by which foreign investors get some incentives, not only in tax-free treatment, but also in sound money if they want to invest upon a certain limit, fresh money, into the country. And then, of course, is the question of reorientation of our industry. It cannot be an industry, a metal mechanic industry. It can be an industry based on some comparative advantages that Croatia has. And these are, let's say, some possible energetic sources. First, we have a very good quality and a very developed water system, which means sources of water which can be exploited in the industry. Instead of, for instance, in Malta, when they are buying water, they don't have many water, but they are buying mineral water from Great Britain because they are attached to Great Britain. They could buy, for instance, water from Croatia. Italy can buy, of course, fresh water, bottled water from Croatia. Then, of course, we have some advantages because of the possibilities of developing solar energy. Then we can exploit our oil energies in the Adriatic Sea. Now we are trying to find energy sources below the sea on the so-called continental shelf, and there are something like 40 shelves that are now have been investigating, and then there are some gas also gas capacities in that area. And of course we need foreign investments. One of the profitable area of our economy is tourism. Tourism is rather profitable, but not on this artisans level. It should be probably on a higher developed level with more refined services, not only selling, as we say, the sun and the sea, but also some other entertainment of the kind that, for instance, Turks develop on their shores, on their seaside. So practically it means a new reorientation. Of course, our tourism is a very strange tourism because it lasts only 2 months. You cannot imagine a profitable tourism that can sustain the country only for 2 months. In Malta it's 8 months, in Greece it's 6 months. In Turkey, it's 6 months. So practically you have to develop such a touristic industry that could attract, of course, consumers from the Western Europe on a modern industrial way. And this means, of course, a long-term and long-range program of reindustrialization of the country, but of a different type. And in this sense, the structural and the cohesion funds will help us, providing that we are enough capable to attract and to offer good and sound programs in order to get this money. Of course, you know that you can get this money only if you have a sound project. You can have this money if you have your own additionability, additionality, which means that you also invest some money in that for getting the money from the European Union. And this is quite a perspective. Initially $4 billion euros will rise to $14 billion up to the year 2020, but providing that we are enough capable to attract this money. Yes.
Esteemed Ambassador, you mentioned that one of the imperatives of Croatia when becoming part of the EU is going to be helping other former Yugoslav countries accessing to the EU as well. My question is, you also mentioned that 2004 Croatia became a candidate state for the EU, and 2005 immediately afterwards began the negotiations for accession. 2005 Macedonia got candidate state status to the EU. It's 2013 today. However, negotiations have not started yet. My question is, what are the lessons that Macedonian governance can learn from Croatia, especially now that the EU is even postponing these negotiations due to recent political events? And what do you think, what are the ways that Macedonia can overcome some of the pressing issues that Croatia apparently started overcoming with non-independent judiciary and corruption, which Macedonia is currently still stuck in?
Yes, if I may answer at once. First, the problem of Macedonia is not lying only with the Macedonians, but with the Greeks. And that's a wrong concept of enlargement, in which you must have a complete unanimous voting decision on those who are entering. I will remind you, when the war broke up in former Yugoslavia, there was not possible to engage the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, because it had a system of decision-making by unanimous consent, which practically paralyzed this organization in helping those who were suffering in the war, including the Bosniaks who suffered the most. So practically we have to change this approach. Greece should not be able to veto the entrance of or the starting of the negotiations with Macedonia because of the name. There should be found a way how to overcome this process. We can overcome this process if we move forward with the European Union. Instead of developing the intergovernmental approach and intergovernmental decision-making, we should more insist on the community method and on the federalization of the European Union in this way, so that practically the European Union can exert a strong pressure on those who are trying to veto some processes, as the starting of the negotiation of Macedonia with the European Union. Secondly, of course, we are going to provide a help and a support to all neighboring countries in providing them with our know-how, which means with the experiences during the negotiation process are valuable, especially because we are the country that negotiated the most. For instance, our negotiation lasted for 6 years. All the negotiations of the other East European countries lasted at least 4 years. Malta had a negotiation more because they wanted more exemptions and opt-outs. But of course, if we take our negotiation process, then we learned substantially. It was a very important learning project. Sometimes we learned the wrong things, sometimes we learned the right things. I think that all in all, we learned very much, and we learned very much to adapt to a new system of value by developing our own capacity to understand better the others and make the others understand us better. So that's the point.
As much as the young lady asked about the corruption,
of course, there is no way to import the fight against corruption. First and second, there is no win. There is no victory, lasting victory over corruption, because the incentive for the corruptions are always around the corner. Therefore, the first we learned that the fight against the corruption has to be held in our country, and that's important for Macedonia too. Of course, entering the European Union, entering the common market was a strong incentive for us. We understood that we have to fight the corruption to approach to the funds, for instance. And Macedonia will have more reasons for doing it because it's less rich than, for instance, Croatia. But I shouldn't speak about richness nor for Macedonia, neither for Croatia. So there is no any other recipe but fight it with a zero tolerance. We have to have a zero tolerance against the corruption everywhere in the European Union, because there is really no country without the corruption. Of course, there is a difference in the quantity between Sweden and now, let's say, Spain, where it infected even the royal family. So you must export, but it's impossible to import the anti-corruption fight.
Let me add something about the corruption, because this is a fascinating theme, of course. Corruption is the main topic also in Niccolò Machiavelli's work, because he was writing about the corruption of politics and corruption of the political system. First, we must identify the causes of corruption and the forms of corruption, because usually the fight against corruption is a very superficial one. You fight only the appearances, and then you think that you can fight only by legal means, by penalizing or bringing to court those who are corrupt and who are corrupting, as you can see, for instance, in some processes today in Italy. But the problem is that you must go beneath the surface, as Machiavelli says, not go to the real essence of things. For instance, I'm speaking of Croatia, of course. I think that we have to identify several causes of Croatia's endemic corruption. First, it is the mentality. It's the mentality that belonged to the past. In some way, the Ottoman Empire still has an influence on us, because it introduced the so-called bakshish mentality. In order to get a favor from the authorities, you must give a shilling. What is a shilling? A small gift to the aga, to the pashas, to the clerk in the city authorities, or something like that. Then, second, you have the so-called inherited corruption from the communist time. Since there was no full market, in order to get a service, you had also to oil the machinery. When you are going to the doctor, you are going to make him a nice present, maybe a candy box, or if he's going to perform an operation, then you are going to give him a nice painting as a sign of your gratitude or something like that, but this is still corruption. When you want to go to the mechanic in order to get in order your car, you had to give something, a bottle of brandy to the mechanic, or chivas, something like that. These are the remnants of the small scale. This is, of course, small scale corruption. But still, it's a form of corruption. And then, of course, in Croatia, you had the war-generated corruption. The corruption that started during the war by smuggling armaments, buying armaments at a high price. At that time I was working with the government, and I was witnessing that we were buying, in order to defend ourselves, armaments at a higher price. And equipment. Why is that so? Because some officials got a certain provision on that. Then, of course, you have the so-called privatization corruption. As I told you, the property was given to those who were clients of the regime. So, after that, you have the corruption in the form of hyper-bureaucratization. A big number of employees in the public services, because each party that comes to the power wants to give a prize for loyalty to their followers, and they employ them as clerks, as administrative officials in the of course, in the apparatus of the state. So, for instance, in Croatia we have 65,000 employees in the central administration, while the European Union calculated it's enough to have 40,000 of them, which means that we have a surplus of 50% of those who work in the public sphere as part of the administrative apparatus, and they are devouring money, because it's not that you have to give them the salary, but the premises cost, the energy cost, the computer, everything. So the cost of the public administration are too high. In order to maintain this system, you must have another source, which is hyper-normativization. What does it mean? The state produces too many laws, and all the laws are conflicting among themselves. Many of them, because there is no interdepartmental coordination. When they bring a law, this is a small law, this is not an organic law, and some of these laws are contradictory in themselves. So they are causing confusion, or as Erasmus from Rotterdam said, they are constituting traps for the citizens, small traps. You need lawyers in order to overcome the traps. I'll give you an example. If in Croatia you want to put a solar cell on your own house, on the roof of your own house, you need 27 permits. It's absurd, because in order to get these 27 permits, you have to work full-time 6 months. So it's much easier to bribe an official in the municipality to get at least 4 or 5 permits at once for you. So you will have to be corrupted, because hyper-normativization impedes you to access to services in a simple way. And this is, of course, if you want to build a house, you must have a so-called location permit and then a construction permit, which is absurd. If you want to go to get a document, you must have a registering of birth that is not older than 6 months. What does it mean? It's absurd. When you are born forever, until you die. So it's enough to have one document. But in our system, you must have, each 6 months you must have to get a new document. You have to pay, you have to wait in line, you have to be submitted to the let's say, mobbing of the bureaucracy, and this is, of course, creates discontent, and it creates corruption. So these are all the elements of corruption with the pathologies of the political system. What are the pathologies of the political system? Populism, demagogy, then hypocrisy, the difference between the promises and the realities, then political manipulations. Politicians, a shrewd politician is that one who is able to manipulate the other colleagues and the public opinion. Then you have classical corruption, then you have, of course, the paranoia. The political paranoia is a very powerful mean of political pathology, but because paranoia means that you are, instead of creating your adversary, a collaborator in the process of a consensus making, you are transforming him in an enemy. And therefore saying we have an agonistic situation of politics. This is the so-called confrontational politics that some politicians here in Italy also are instigating. They are creating paranoia of former communists, former fascists, whatever else. And then, of course, you have violence. As President Napolitano said yesterday, it is not only physical violence, it's also violence by words. Oral violence, the hate speech, these are terrible forms of violence. Mobbing by words, mobbing by creating psychological and subliminal forms of dependence. These are all pathologies of the democracies, and therefore democracies should also undergo a revision in each country per se. Thank you.
I don't know if we've got time, but please, we have one question back there, and then 3 more.
Nel contesto del progetto europeo Ecosmed, di cui anche la Croazia fa parte, che tipo di memoria si riesce a fare, non solo delle questioni della seconda guerra mondiale, ma anche della guerra e dei massacri genocidari che sono avvenuti nei paesi balcanici tramite le istituzioni croate?
Beh, abbiamo qui la società civile che ci lavora e che è molto importante, con l'università. Am I going to...
It's better to go in English because
Okay.
not all the students understand.
Yes, the question was about the activities of remembrance, a project that is going on now here. And I think that it is very important to develop this remembrance of all the thoughts and all the wrongdoings that were made throughout history. Because if we don't deal with history and with the wrongdoings of history, history will deal with us, as it is well known. So therefore, we have always to keep this remembrance of the Second World War, of all the crimes committed there, because these were atrocious crimes, and this should become part of our identity. Not only those crimes, but also the crimes committed after that, and all the forms of violation of human rights. We have to know that in the aftermath of the Second World War, we also had some crimes perpetrated by the communist regime towards the dissenters, towards those who were especially in the first year against the regime. We had also some forms of, let's say, ethnic intolerance, especially towards the Italians who then left the country, Croatia and Slovenia and other countries there, especially with the Germans who suffered the so-called collective guilt imposed upon them. And then, of course, we have all the atrocities of the war, or the Balkan Wars from 1991 to 1995. This we have to build in our everyday consciousness, awareness, in order not to repeat this in the future. Unfortunately, the wars in former Yugoslavia learned us that we have not learned the lessons of history, that wars can explode at any moment. That's the problem. That harassment and violations of human rights can escalate if we don't stop them, if we don't deal with them, if we don't talk about them. Therefore, closing our eye at some forms of pathologies of violence will not help us, unfortunately. And therefore, we have to keep up remembrance, and of course, we fully support this project, and our students also from Zagreb University are taking part in it, because each segment of the society should give its contribution. The academia, especially the civil society, and the intellectuals who have to deal with that. Yes? Another question?
Aida.
How many questions? No?
No.
Okay.
Well, let's do it.
The girl and then you.
Yes. I would like to ask, what are the forecasts for out-migration in Croatia after this session, and how is Croatia going to cope with this potential immigration and the expected demographic downturn?
Yes, according to our prognosis, we have a demographic downturn, and probably in the year 2050, the natality growth rate will be the same. We shall have less for 500,000 of inhabitants. But of course, the problem is that we want to be a modern, open society, and therefore we shall accept migrants, especially in order to develop some special sectors of our industry and economy. We don't expect very many immigrants going abroad after we enter the European Union. I think that the first wave was in the 90s, the second wave was in the 2000 year, and of course there is some emigration, especially the brain drain. We have qualified people from university, from information technologies and computer technologies that try to get to the very sources where these technologies are developed. But we do not envisage a great emigration. What do we envisage? Possibly a migration towards Croatia, but this has to be intended in a positive way, because it will help us to maintain the population rate, and of course to fill all the posts in a possibly developing industry and economy.
Yes, we need somebody to pay our pensions.
Yes.
first, I am actually a bit surprised by this view of the European Union as a godlike savior. I come from a country where we have quite two ethnic violence, and from 2004 it has not solved anything. Of course, the borders have opened, but we still remain there is still a problem, and there has not been any progress concerning this. So, seeing Cyprus as seeing European Union as a savior, I don't think the ultimate savior or the thing that can save everything, European Union itself. The second, the issue with Macedonia as well, I'm not Greek, but because I have been raised in the Greek way, I mean, I find this thing with etymology completely nonsense, actually, because I worked in the embassy and in the Cypriot embassy, and there was this in one. There was this I don't know a conflict about coffee. Is it a Turkish coffee or a Cypriot coffee? And I find it conflict. I mean, it's complete nonsense.
Because of Serb coffee.
Yeah, because of coffee. I mean, why should me and Angela would never had a discussion about the name of Macedonia, but it's because diplomacy sees this as a win-lose situation. If you say that the Greeks should accept it, but it's not like this, because you have to discuss, you have to see the both problems. So if you say that anonymity is the problem, and you do not take in consideration the Greek and the Cyprus problem, because it's also Cyprus that does not accept this problem. But as I said, it's not my opinion, but we shouldn't be completely factionalists and structuralists, because we shouldn't generalize everything.
Okay, first about the role of the European Union as a savior. Well, in our case, the European Union is not a savior, but it provided us with some pressures from outside in order to reform our society. And this has to be taken into account. The European Union was a strong catalyst for change. The change could have not been achieved without the European Union. Why? Because the powers from below were so weak that we needed a strong ally from the upside. And the upside was the European Union and all the European countries that helped us to fight the battle for democracy. In the middle there was a government and there were politicians, the political structure that was very resistant to reforms and to changes. So the only way is to put them into a sandwich. So from below the people and the public opinion, and from up the strong solidarity of the European countries in helping us to develop criteria of human rights observance and democratic practices. So this was, in our case, not a savior, it was a catalyst. And it was in the same time also a deterrent, the carrot and the stick in a way. Very positive in our case. For instance, probably there would be no problem solved without the European Union. Look at that. One problem, one tiny problem. Our territorial dispute with Slovenia about a small bay called Piran Bay, which is between Croatia and Slovenia, and we quarreled for something about 20 years. Who will prevail in that bay? Will the boundary go 1 kilometer here or 1 kilometer there? And this bay is so small and irrelevant that even the fishes that live there know each other by name. But we were stuck in a negotiation for 20 years. We didn't want to negotiate. Then the European Union helped us to negotiate and find a way, find an arbitration tribunal, choose our arbitrators. The European Union will be one arbitrator, and we will solve this problem. Now, when we enter the European Union, there will be no problem at all, because there will be no boundaries. You see the absurdity of this problem. So the problem is Cyprus for Macedonia also, for Turkey also to enter the European Union. Therefore, the Turks should also be helped to approach the European Union and to solve their own internal difficulties in order to get along with the criteria of the European Union. In that case, there will be probably facilitation for having a dialogue between the Greeks and the Macedonians, between the separate Greeks and the Turks, because as Churchill said, it's much better to talk than to joe, to show your jaws in order to bite. Or as the Chinese said, it's better to negotiate for 10 years than to have a war for one day. Therefore, there are no other solutions. Negotiate. Try to find a compromise, because only by finding compromise can we live in this different, terrible, threatening world that we live in.
We can't let you leave us without a question on the release of General Gotovina and Markac. I protest for the question, but you told us you're going to be honest with us. So I was among those who were quite astonished by the release of the two generals. And I would like to ask you whether you see it like a great gift for the Croatia and something really counterproductive for the regional reconciliation and for the integration process in the bilateral relation with Serbia.
Well, I'll tell you frankly. First, we have to observe the authority of the Hague Tribunal. First, if we agree to cooperate with the Hague Tribunal. Sometimes sentences are harsh, sometimes sentences are unjust, but they are sentences. So it was the tribunal that decided that they didn't take part into the so-called criminal group that envisaged the ethnic cleansing and, of course, the violations of wars in the region of China. It doesn't mean that crimes have been committed against the Serbian population and that those perpetrators has to be found. Unfortunately, the Croatian judiciary was slow and it didn't find those who committed the crimes. There were something like 1,000 persons indicted by the tribunals, but sentences are very slow to pass and very, let's say, sometimes because of the pressures of the public opinion or the pressures of the politicians, judiciary doesn't function very well. As far as the belonging to the criminal enterprise, well, I think personally that those who were the real culprits for this are unfortunately dead. Not only Milosevic, but also President Tudjman and especially the Minister of Defense, Gojko Šuša, who think, and General Bobetko too. So those who are really the perpetrators and the possible indictees for belonging to a criminal enterprise are dead. The tribunal decided that they were just executing the orders and that they therefore served as military. Well, it's a disputable problem, of course. It's a problem disputable within international law and international criminal law, and therefore I think that in such way we should first stick to the fact that all the perpetrators should be brought to justice by national courts. If national courts fail, then the criminal tribunal should act. In this case, I think that Croatia should run faster with the indictments for those crimes committed in the near aftermath and during the so-called Operation Stop.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I think there's no time left, so I have to thank all who took part of this very interesting conference, Ambassador Grubiša, Professor Breške, Professor Felitere Piantini, and thank you all for being here this morning with us.